I'm still on this same kick. I call it a kick, crucifixion kick. A couple Wednesdays ago, we went to Psalm 22. We read through that, and we talked about, we're not going to go there, we're going to go to Hebrews chapter 5. I'm just kind of reviewing. In Psalm 22, we talked about the emotional anguish of David and of Jesus. That was a type there. It's also Israel. All three of those are in type in that particular psalm. And the emotional anguish that they were experiencing when their own flesh and blood had forsaken them. Jesus had it both ways, because not only did his brethren shout, "Crucify him," but God had to forsake him that day and look the other way because of all the sin that was laid on him. And the reason God forsook him was so that he wouldn't have to forsake us. And so we said there was a reason that God did not deliver David from his emotional pain. In the moment that David wrote those things down, he is hiding out. He's hiding away from whichever it was. Either Saul was trying to kill him, or if it was when his son was trying to kill him, Absalom. Either way, he cried out to God for help with those emotions, and he realized before he got to the end of it, these emotional things, they're going to help me. There's an end result here that's going to be good, even though it's so heavy right now. There's an end result. There's somebody that I can help. There's something that's going to take place, because David wrote many psalms during this time, and he talked about how if I hadn't been afflicted, I wouldn't know these things to be able to declare it to God's people and be a help to them. And when you get that in your mindset, then everything in life, it may still hurt. There's still emotional pain. There's still tears to be wept. You don't hold it in, you weep them. But all the while saying God is sovereign, God knows, none of this took God by surprise. He knows better than we. And you move on through it, and He takes you through it. He doesn't take you away from it. He takes you through it. If we'll let Him. If we decide that woe is me and God hates me and all this, then we got to go through it on our own. And man, it's even heavier then. And so that's what we talked about then. We seen that God does not take our emotional pain away from us, because it teaches us what emotional pain is and enables us to be more helpful to others in need. And Hebrews chapter 5 is the second part of that. Hebrews chapter 5 of that message. We never got to it because we run out of time, and I know that was 2 weeks ago. Last week was not a good one for me. Got over it quick, but it did not start out well last Wednesday. In Hebrews chapter 5, we'll see this same flow, this same subject matter. Paul is setting up Jesus as the high priest, why he was the high priest, and it puts us It likens us to him as priests, because that's what we are. We'll see that in a minute. I think if we go to 1 Peter and we'll look there, but I'm going to wait till we get to about verse 4 or so to do that. Let's read verse 1 and 2 and we'll get into this. Verse 1 and 2 of Hebrews chapter 5. And this is talking about the human high priests that ordered the temple in the Old Testament. It says, "For every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins." This is talking about the physical temple in the Old Testament. It had a physical priest that would offer the gifts that the people would bring, the offerings, and the sacrifices for their sins. This man would. And then it goes on to say, the reason why it was a man that did that. It says, "Who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity." This human man that's supposed to be just like everybody else. Now, oftentimes that's not what took place. The priests were elevated above the people and thought to be separate from the people, which God did separate them, but not for the purpose of lifting them up above everybody else, but for the purpose of setting them apart, giving them certain things to do. But the Bible here says they were infirm. They had infirmities as well as the people. They were just like they were. And then it says, we know that this infirmity is not a physical infirmity like a sickness or a disease. It can't be. Because all through Leviticus 21, the priest could not have any physical infirmities, or he could not be a priest. The priests were to do a lot of things. They had a big job. If they had any infirmities, then the house of God would not get taken care of. So they had to not have any physical ailments. They couldn't even be sterile. They had to be able to have kids, or they couldn't work the temple. And I know some would say, now, does God not want people that are sick to approach his throne, or what's the deal with that? And that's not it at all. I mean, the people outside, they could come to the temple, offer their sacrifices, offer their gifts to the priest, but they couldn't go before God in the temple because it was a type, it was a picture of Christ. Christ was without blemish, you see. And I know it's a physical type with a spiritual picture later, but that's what all the Old Testament is. So it's not that God didn't want no sick people around, because when Jesus came, who did he attract? The sick. Everybody that had, the woman that had the infirmity for 18 years. It was a spirit of infirmity. That means a depression or something like that. Her spirit, she was so sad, so depressed, she couldn't even lift her head up. It wasn't an infirmity where she was diseased. It was a spirit of infirmity. And so these priests, they couldn't have any physical ailments, but they had all kinds of infirmities. They had shortcomings. They were supposed to know it. They were supposed to understand the people. That way, the people coming that had infirmities, the priest could say, I've been there. I know where you're coming from. Here's some advice. And we go, take your gift or take your sacrifice and I'll offer it for you and for me. That's what the priest was supposed to say. This is not just for you, this is for my sin too. Preachers are supposed to be that way too. You don't hear them saying that a lot these days, but that's literally what they're supposed to be doing for their people, is identifying with them, equalizing themselves with them. And it gives comfort. Because the biggest part of our emotional pain in a church setting is the shortcomings. We feel so inadequate or infirm. That's what infirm really means, inadequate. Unable to stand strong all the time. Does that make sense? An infirmity. We're taught to stand strong in the Lord. But sometimes we fall. We fail. That's every one of us. And so this priest was supposed to go before his people as one like them. He's also compassed with infirmity, and so he could be a faithful priest to them. He could be one that could be compassionate towards them, not one that is like this, a compassionate one. And that's what we are supposed to be as well. We are all priests now, every one of us. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2, just so we'll see that there. 1 Peter chapter 2. While you're turning there, no, we'll go ahead and go there. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. This is Peter talking to the believers of his day and ours, of course. He says, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." That's what the priest was supposed to do. See, I'm just like you. I was in the darkness. I failed God on a regular basis. He delivered me out of that and brought me to where I am today. That's what a faithful priest does. Boy, it's driving me crazy. That bother you guys? Okay. Back to our text in Hebrews chapter 5. Now that we saw that, it talked about the called of God. We're a royal priesthood. We've been called out of darkness. Then back to our text in verse 3, it says, "And by reason hereof he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sins." See, that's something I already said. When he was offering for them, he was offering for himself too. Verse 4, "And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron." We see how it's getting back to us. It's because we just saw in 1 Peter that we are called out of darkness into his marvelous light. And now Hebrews chapter 5. This is not just anybody can do this. Nobody just goes around and says, "I'm going to do this." This is a calling. We are called of God. Me and you. We are priests. We're supposed to do this for everybody. We're to offer for our own sins and for the sins of others. A lot of time we just do that by showing up to church. Just showing up to give that boost to people that are down. That going around and just tapping people on the shoulder and saying, I'm glad to see you today. You're offering up sacrifices there, you see, because you don't have to do that. You can just stay in your little shell, go find your little spot in your pew, go sit down, listen to the sermon, get up and leave. But you don't. You make sure people know that you're glad they're there. That's offering up those sacrifices. That's being a good and a faithful priest, because you know that you like it when people acknowledge your existence. Somebody said one time that, it's been a long time ago, and they're not around here, they told somebody that I didn't shake their hand one day. And this person thought I was really going to get upset with that. And I said, oh man, I'm going to make sure that I shake that person's hand, because I don't want them to feel like I don't want to shake their hand. You know, because I know what it's like if somebody doesn't shake my hand. I probably would never tell anybody about it, but I know that it doesn't feel right. Is there a problem there? And so but being a faithful priest and knowing how it feels not to have your hand shook, the faithful priest says, I'm going to make sure I shake that person's hand. From now on, I'm going to make sure that I find them and see them, no matter what it is. If I remember halfway through the service that I didn't get over there to see them, I'm going to make sure that I shake their hand. That's being a faithful high priest, or faithful priest, you see. And we are the called of God. This is what we're called to do. Verse 5 in our text, so also Christ glorified not himself to be made an high priest, but he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. As he saith also in another place, Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. It's just a name that was given to this high priest of the Old Testament. Everybody that I know of believes that was Christ in the Old Testament, being the high priest, taking his place, offering before they had a temple set up or anything. And this is the order. If you remember in our studies of Genesis, we talked about Abraham offering tithes to this Melchizedek. That's how early this guy was. God says to Jesus, you're a priest after this order, this king of righteousness. Verse 7, who in the days of his flesh, being Jesus, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. This is talking about what we discussed Sunday. Jesus, when he's in the garden, he is facing death. He offers up strong crying and tears unto the Father. He tells his disciples, I am sorrowful unto death. I may not make it past this garden. And when he said to God, he said, if it's possible, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And then his answer was, it is my will. And he was strengthened in that. Remember how it said he rose up and he told his disciples, sleep on now. Earlier he was saying, won't you get up and just hang with me for a little bit? I'm sorrowful unto death. His prayer was answered in that, not take me from this, not deliver me from it, but your will to be done was his real prayer. And when it was answered, when he knew no deliverance came, and he had to drink the cup, he got up. The Bible even says an angel came and strengthened him. He got up and he says, let's do this thing. Verse 8 says, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. Now, in a sense, this is what every one of us is to do. We are to learn obedience through the things which we suffer. Now, Jesus didn't learn how to obey. He was the walking law. He never broke it in any point. He kept it perfectly. That's why he's able to pay for our sin. What Jesus learned was the price of obedience. What it costs to obey. What obedience has to offer in this world. And sometimes it's very heavy. Sometimes it's losing our friends. Sometimes it's losing our family. Sometimes it's losing our husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends for standing for what's right. The price of obedience. And that's why Jesus is able to be a faithful priest. Because he was here. He felt those pains of the rejection for standing on what was right. And so he can be our mediator between the Father and the devil. You realize the devil's accusing you day and night before the throne. That's the best prosecuting attorney that there is. Because he knows everything about you. He watches your every move. He's got minions all over the place that brings him all these accusations, and he stands there just like in a court of law. And he says, you're still going to love them? Just think, look at what they did this week. Look at what they're looking at, or look at what they indulged in this week, and you're still going to mediate for them? He is a good prosecuting attorney. But we got a lawyer standing there for us that's even better. And see, this is where we're to make our life that way. We're to mediate for others. If you suffer with depression, be a mediator for others that suffer with depression. Find out who they are. I said a couple weeks ago that this fellow I was taking to rehab, he says, I don't understand it, I just keep going back. I've been to all these rehabs, I don't know what to do any different. I said, the only way you'll ever get victory is if when you get out, you start helping people that's right where you are right now. You get in a ministry that's helping people that are addicted. It's the only way you'll ever get victory. It's the only way you'll have any kind of a pleasure in this world is to do that. That's what these things are for. Once you become called out of the darkness into His marvelous light, that doesn't mean that now all you experience is these roses falling and good times and everything's perfect. No, it's just now you use all them bad things that happen to you for the good of somebody else. That's what we do. We get this backwards. And even people will say that. If you come to God, then all will be well. It's not true. It may be that way for some people, but that's when you notice the fight. That's when the struggle really begins, when you become a believer. So to be a faithful priest, man, we could apply so many things to this. Bad day at work. Bad day at work, and maybe you're not as nice as you should have been. How do you turn that into a help to others? Maybe you flew off the handle at somebody. A faithful priest says, I got to go back and I got to apologize about that. I got to make things right. I got to make sure people know that that's not who I want to be. And then they see you, oh man, he's just like us. He's just like us. Back up to Hebrews chapter 2 real quick and just look at one verse. Hebrews 2:17. Hebrews 2:17. It says, wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself hath suffered, being tempted, he is able to secure them that are tempted. Secure means to strengthen, to stabilize, to help in their time of need. He's able to do that. And see, that's what we're to do. We're to be them merciful and faithful priests, making reconciliation to other people. Just our lifestyles, just people watching our lives do that, is reconciling them to a God that they've been told all along that he expects all these things from you. You got to be good and do all these things, and I know where all that applies. But to reconcile in their mind that God's not their enemy, and you're not their enemy. That's the first step in bringing them to the reconciliation. As Jesus was our high priest, and he suffered, he went all the way to the end, suffered all that emotional anguish, got right down there to the Garden of Gethsemane, and all of our sins are placed on him there. He was very pressed down. That's what Gethsemane means, the olive press. And it all laid on him right there. He felt every bit of guilt that we feel when we fail him. Every bit of everything was on him right then. How can you imagine? Just think about the how we feel when we mess up one time as a believer. And Jesus being perfect, and then the sins of the whole world, the people that don't even have any feelings when they sin, even he felt them. Because he's perfect. You see, our suffering is supposed to make us faithful priests. We can go to God for others, for them that are hurting, and pour our hearts out to God because we've had experience in this. And we can have true compassion because we have been there. Just like it said, Jesus was touched with our infirmities. He became a person. He became a man so that he could go through every temptation that we ever face, every trial that we ever face. He faced it. And now he can be a faithful priest to us. That's why we can still go before the throne of God, even though we're imperfect, even though we mess up day to day. How do we mess up? How do we mess up? Just by not trusting Him. Letting our emotions get the best of us at times, bulling up. That's the worst. That's the worst way we mess up, is with our emotions. Maybe sometimes we go after something else to try to help us with those emotions, rather than going to Him. And He said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Our suffering has a purpose. And we can be men and women of understanding. Sometimes it's very hard. We work very hard for something. Somebody comes along, squanders it. I understand. But this is where it says, we started out reading this in chapter 5. Chapter 5, it talks about, in verse 2, it says, "Who can have compassion on the ignorant?" Have you ever been ignorant of something? Who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way? That's in answer to the man ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins for those that come and offer before God. Who can have compassion on the ignorant? You and I can. We may be ignorant of something tomorrow. That's how it works. Who can have compassion on the ignorant? The ignorant. That's us. We're both parties. That'll help us in this life. That'll help us not be so stressed out when... I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they were talking to me about how women ought to dress and stuff. And then they started talking about stupid people. That told me what spirit was there right away. Stupid people. And the reason they were saying that was because this person didn't understand what the Bible meant about being in the image of Christ. This was, the image of Christ, you really got to think deeply about this to understand what that means. And she was talking about, I said it was a she, didn't I? It was a person that was trying to convince me of something that I was doing wrong in our church. And about the image of Christ. And then I found out at the end of it, she had no idea what the image of Christ even was. When you can stand there and call people stupid, is that the image of Christ? It's not, is it? Now, if anybody had the right to call people stupid, it was Christ. But He didn't do that, did He? He was a faithful high priest. He identified with everybody, even though He could have been above everyone. He could have. we're all ignorant, some form, some fashion. When we grow to the position that we're in, we're still ignorant of things higher than us. But there are those that aren't to where we are at yet. And we can have compassion on their ignorance. Are you getting me? This is what the Christian life is supposed to be. We're supposed to seek this out. Find those that are struggling. Find out who it is that has the struggles that maybe you're in right now, or that you've found an answer to somewhat, and you bring them along with you. It's the only thing that gets us through this life. Otherwise, we keep running back to the same old stuff that doesn't make us feel any better, doesn't make anybody else feel any better either. It's a hard lesson because when you're walking in the right direction and you're trying to do everything just right, and like the song that we sung, tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder. We wonder what it's all worth, because things continue to happen to us. We think we're doing so well that God ought to be blessing us and bad things shouldn't be happening to us anymore, and everything that we want should be falling into our lap. And it can happen that way. It's just, it may not be just time yet. Just stay the course. Keep helping people that's going through what you are. And the end goal is so much better. The end goal is so much better. I hope this has been somewhat of a blessing, and that we're able to take this out and use it, especially in this season. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this tonight. I pray that we would be able to be faithful priests as you were a faithful high priest, and still are being our faithful high priest right now. We can come before you daily. We can come before you minute by minute. And in this world, sometimes we need to. And our ignorance of things, it doesn't catch you by surprise. You don't say to us, "Oh, ignorant person, you just need to do this or that." You know what it's like to live this life. You know what emotions do. Lord, if we would take a note from you and remember that when we're walking through this life, and if we're ever harsh to somebody, think about when we have had somebody be harsh to us. Even though we might have deserved it, and even though they might have deserved it. This is how we be faithful priests, is by identifying with them. Whoever it may be, somebody that's out in the world lost. It's the only way they'll ever find God, to see something different than the rest of the world. Give us this ability, this strength, especially during this time. It's Easter time, this coming Sunday, and then we got Friend Day coming up in about a month. Lord, we can really pack this house if we'll just get out there and befriend people. We got work to do. We've got children to reach. We've got parents to reach. Help us to fulfill our priesthood and be that holy nation that you want from us. Lord, bless our fellowship here tonight, and we thank you so much for it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right.